"Aren't you going to cook lunch, useless old woman?" That's what my daughter-in-law, Chelsea, shouted at me in front of everyone during a family lunch. Her words stung so deep that I felt the ground slip beneath me. And the worst part? My own son, Daniel, sat right beside her and didn't say a single word to defend me. Stay with me while I tell you what happened that day, because it's not just about one insult. It's about the moment everything inside me changed. My name is Margaret. I'm in my late 60s, a widow who raised her son alone after losing my husband far too soon. I thought I had faced life's hardest battles already, but nothing prepared me for the humiliation that came from my own family. The lunch was supposed to be a happy gathering. Neighbors, cousins, and friends were sitting around the picnic tables, enjoying the summer breeze. I had already spent the morning cooking: potato salad, beans, cornbread. My knees hurt, but I kept going because I wanted the day to be pleasant for everyone. I thought I had done enough. But when Chelsea demanded I cook more, I politely said I was tired. That's when she lashed out, her voice sharp, echoing across the yard. "Aren't you going to cook lunch, useless old woman?" The words hung heavy in the air. Conversation stopped. Someone dropped a fork. Children froze mid-play. And me? I felt like my entire body shrank under the weight of her insult. My heart pounded as though I had run a mile, but I couldn't make a sound. I turned to Daniel, hoping, praying, he would defend me, remind Chelsea of the respect I deserved. But he looked down at his plate, his jaw tight, saying nothing. That silence was louder than Chelsea's voice. It cut deeper than any insult could. I could feel the eyes of everyone around us. Some avoided looking at me, some exchanged awkward glances. The air was heavy with pity, maybe even shame, but no one spoke up. I sat frozen, my face burning, fighting back tears that threatened to escape. So I smiled. A small, weak smile to cover the storm inside me. I sipped my water slowly, pretending her words had rolled right off me. But they hadn't. They had pierced straight into the place where my dignity lived. That afternoon, while the laughter slowly returned around me, I sat in silence, feeling smaller and more invisible than I ever had in my life. Chelsea thought she had embarrassed me. Maybe she had. But inside, something shifted. Something broke, and something else started to grow. I knew then that this moment wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning of something neither Chelsea nor Daniel could see coming. Before Chelsea came into our lives, things were different. Life wasn't easy, but Daniel and I had a bond one cherished. When his father passed away suddenly, I was left alone to raise a small boy in a world that felt too big for just the two of us. I had no choice but to work myself to the bone. 2 jobs most days, sometimes 3, just to make sure Daniel never felt the absence of his father too deeply. There were mornings I skipped breakfast so he could eat. Nights I went to bed hungry so he could have a full plate. Every penny I earned, every ounce of energy I had, was for him. I remember walking him to school in the cold, telling him stories to make him laugh, listening to his little complaints and dreams, and feeling proud of the boy he was becoming. When the time came for college, I stretched every dime I had saved and worked overtime for months to cover tuition. I never asked for help, never leaned on anyone else, and I never remarried, even when the loneliness gnawed at me. My life revolved around Daniel, and he knew it. He was always a thoughtful, loving son. I remember the night before he left for college. He hugged me tightly and whispered, "Mom, I'll always take care of you, no matter what." I believed him. That promise kept me going through the hardest nights, when bills piled up or my body ached from endless work. I felt proud of the life I had built for us, proud that Daniel was growing into a man who understood kindness and gratitude. But things began to change after Chelsea appeared. At first, I tried to like her, to welcome her into our small family. I wanted Daniel to be happy, and I told myself maybe she would be a good partner for him. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the warmth between Daniel and me started to fade. He became more distracted, more distant, caught up in his own world and hers. I began noticing the subtle changes. The way he nodded silently when Chelsea spoke over me, the way he avoided eye contact during small disagreements. Chelsea didn't hide her disdain. She dismissed my opinions, rolled her eyes when I tried to help, and made little comments about my age, my habits, my ways. Daniel didn't defend me anymore. The boy who once promised to take care of me became the man who allowed me to be overlooked, even humiliated. I remember thinking, over and over, how quickly the life I had poured everything into had shifted. The home we had built together, the sacrifices I had made, the love I had given freely, it felt invisible now. And yet deep inside, I also felt a spark. A quiet determination. Because while they might not see my worth, I still knew it. I had carried us both through storms, and I wasn't about to disappear quietly, no matter how much Chelsea tried to make me feel small. That realization, bitter and painful as it was, marked the first time I truly understood that the life I had worked so hard to protect was now something I needed to defend. Not just for me, but for the dignity I had earned over decades. After Chelsea moved in with Daniel, the house felt different, colder, heavier, like the warmth I had built over decades was being pushed out. At first, she insisted it was only temporary, that I would stay, just until we found a nice retirement home for you. I agreed, wanting to keep peace. But almost immediately I sensed her intentions weren't as innocent as her words. Every corner of the house seemed to shrink for me, every familiar spot suddenly claimed by her. It was as if she was taking over my home while pretending to be generous. Daniel, who had once been my constant companion, my sounding board, and my defender, began changing too. He became distant, polite but reserved, always looking to Chelsea before he answered me. Even small decisions, what to have for dinner, which chores needed doing, were now filtered through her. The boy who had once promised to always care for me now seemed to see me as someone optional, a presence to tolerate rather than cherish. Chelsea didn't hide her disdain. At first, it was subtle, a sigh when I offered to help, a flicker of annoyance when I moved something she considered hers. But soon, her words became sharper. "Mom, don't you think it's time you learned to keep the kitchen tidy?" she asked once, her tone coated with judgment. Another day, she scoffed when I tried to vacuum a corner, muttering something about old habits dying hard. Even small things, how I folded the laundry, how I arranged the chairs, became reasons for her to roll her eyes or make pointed remarks. She questioned my usefulness constantly, implying that my age made me incapable, a burden rather than a member of the family. And Daniel, he never spoke up. He never reminded her that I had raised him alone, that I had worked tirelessly so he could have a comfortable life. Whenever Chelsea snapped or made a cutting remark, Daniel would just nod, sometimes offer a weak smile, and move on as if nothing had happened. It was as though he had handed over his loyalty to her, and I was expected to quietly accept it. I tried to remind myself that I was a guest in my own home. Temporarily, but the reality was harder to swallow. Every corner, every room, every routine I had established over decades felt invaded. Chelsea acted like she was in charge, and Daniel's silence encouraged her. I felt like a shadow moving through a house that had once been my sanctuary. The most painful part was realizing how quickly our dynamic had shifted. Daniel was no longer the son who looked out for me. He had become a bystander to my own diminishing role in the family. Chelsea's presence didn't just make the house feel crowded. It made me feel invisible. Every polite smile I forced, every chore I attempted, every word I chose carefully was met with subtle scorn or ignored entirely. In that moment, I began to see the truth. This wasn't just about living arrangements or household routines. It was about control. Chelsea wanted it all, and Daniel was letting her have it. And as much as it hurt, I also understood something important. I wasn't going to disappear quietly, no matter how much they tried to make me feel small. That realization planted the first seeds of a plan, one that would remind them both that I was far from powerless. The summer afternoon was warm, the backyard buzzing with neighbors' laughter and the smell of grilled food drifting through the air. I had spent the morning preparing side dishes, coleslaw, baked beans, potato salad, making sure everything was ready before the barbecue started. I thought I had contributed enough, that the day would be peaceful, filled with friendly chatter and smiles. But peace was not to be. Chelsea's mood was tense from the start. She hovered near the grill, barking orders at Daniel about how the burgers should be cooked, the drinks arranged, and the tables set. I tried to stay out of the way, carrying a bowl here, refilling napkins there, hoping to avoid drawing her attention. But it was only a matter of time before she found something to complain about. "Margaret," she called sharply, "aren't you going to cook lunch? There's still plenty to do, and we can't have our guests waiting." Her words were sharp, full of impatience, and her tone cut through the casual hum of conversation. I took a deep breath and tried to respond politely. "I've already prepared the side dishes, Chelsea. I'm a bit tired, so I'll sit for a while if that's okay." For a moment, I thought she might let it go. I tried to smile, hoping to diffuse the tension, but that smile quickly froze on my face as she snapped even louder. "Aren't you going to cook lunch, useless old woman?" The words landed like a hammer. Laughter stopped mid-sentence. Children paused mid-run. Conversations faltered, and for a heartbeat, the backyard was silent. I could hear the clink of silverware against plates, the shuffle of feet, and the faint rustle of leaves in the trees. All eyes turned to me. I could feel their gaze as if it were a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. I glanced at Daniel, searching for even a flicker of defense or support. But he looked away, pretending not to notice, as though denying me the dignity of acknowledgement would erase Chelsea's cruelty. My face burned, a mixture of shame, anger, and disbelief flooding through me. I felt frozen, unable to respond, my hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles went white. I wanted to speak, to tell her she had no right to treat me that way, to remind everyone present that I had raised Daniel alone, worked tirelessly, and poured my life into this family. But no words came. Instead, I swallowed my pride and my hurt, holding back the tears that threatened to spill. My humiliation was complete, and in that moment, I realized just how alone I truly was in the very family I had devoted my life to. Around me, the crowd murmured softly, unsure how to react. Chelsea smirked, satisfied with the spectacle she had created, while Daniel remained silent, a silent witness to my suffering. And as I stood there, feeling the weight of every judgmental gaze, a quiet fire began to ignite inside me. Something deep, long-buried, stirred, an understanding that this moment would not define me, but it would mark the beginning of a change I would make on my terms and with my strength. That night, after everyone had gone home and the backyard was quiet, I found myself alone in the living room. The house felt emptier than ever, the echoes of laughter and conversation replaced by the heavy silence that seemed to press against my chest. I sat on the edge of the couch, the memory of Chelsea's cruel words still sharp in my mind, and for the first time, I let the tears come. Quietly, so they wouldn't stain my pillow or my pride, I cried for the humiliation, for the betrayal, and for the son who had once promised to always care for me, but now sat silent while I was mocked. It wasn't just sadness, it was a mixture of hurt, disbelief, and a strange, burning anger. I replayed every moment of that barbecue in my mind. The way Chelsea had shouted, the way the neighbors had gone silent, and most painfully, the way Daniel had looked away. How could the boy I had raised with so much love and sacrifice abandon me like that? The tears rolled down my cheeks as I thought about the years I had poured into our life together. Years of work, of sleepless nights, of endless patience. Amid the tears, I remembered something my late husband used to say. He had a way of speaking that stayed with you long after he was gone. Respect is earned, he had said, but it is also defended. I had spent my life earning respect for Daniel, for myself, for the home I had built alone. And yet, there I was, my dignity trampled and my voice ignored. The memory of his words sparked something within me. A reminder that respect could not just be expected, it had to be protected, even if it meant standing alone. I wiped my cheeks, feeling the sting of tears, but also a growing clarity. I realized that being treated like a burden was no longer acceptable. I had given my life to this family, yet here I was dismissed and belittled. If I wanted to maintain my dignity, if I wanted to protect the years of effort, sacrifice, and love I had invested, I could no longer rely on anyone else. I had to take control of my own story, quietly, deliberately, without letting my emotions make me reckless. The anger that had simmered beneath my grief began to take shape into a plan. Not a rash, impulsive act meant to hurt Chelsea or Daniel in the heat of the moment, but a calculated, patient strategy. I would show them that I was not powerless. I would reclaim my place in my own home, my own life, and my own family, and I would do it with the dignity that had been denied me. As I sat there in the quiet, the house dark except for the faint glow of the streetlight outside, a sense of resolve settled over me. The tears had cleansed some of the pain, leaving behind focus, determination, and a quiet strength. I no longer felt like the useless woman Chelsea claimed I was. I felt like someone who had been underestimated, and someone ready to rise carefully, deliberately, and unshakably from the humiliation that had once crushed her. From that night forward, I knew my patience and strategy would be my greatest weapons, and nothing, not Chelsea's cruelty, not Daniel's silence, would make me forget that. What Daniel and Chelsea didn't know was that I had quietly built a safety net over the years, one that wasn't flashy or loud but solid enough to give me control when I needed it most. When Daniel bought the house shortly after his marriage, I had helped him with a significant part of the down payment. I never made a fuss about it, never told him or Chelsea that my name remained on the deed. To them, it was simply their house, But legally, it was mine too, a fact they never even considered. It had been a practical decision at the time. I wanted to help Daniel get started in life, to give him a stable place to raise a family, and to feel secure in his marriage. I didn't ask for recognition or gratitude. I just wanted to see my son succeed. I never anticipated that one day, this very house would become the stage for Chelsea's arrogance and Daniel's silence. In addition to the house, I had quietly saved over the years. 2 decades of working long hours, of being frugal, of skipping little luxuries. Those savings sat tucked away in a bank account only I had access to. Chelsea assumed I had nothing, that I was fragile and dependent, a woman whose value ended when her cooking and chores stopped. She assumed my age and quiet demeanor meant weakness. Her arrogance blinded her to the truth. She mocked me, belittled me, and treated me like a burden, never imagining that I had resources, knowledge, and legal rights she could never touch. Daniel, too, failed to see it. He had grown used to assuming I would simply tolerate whatever Chelsea threw at me, that I would quietly accept every insult, every command, every act of dismissal. I smiled quietly to myself one evening as I thought about it. They had underestimated me, as so many people had over the years. They assumed silence meant submission, that patience meant helplessness. But patience had its purpose. It gave me time to plan, to observe, to wait until I had the right moment to assert my position. The reality was, I had the power all along. The house they believed belonged entirely to them was partially mine. My savings were sufficient to ensure that I could make choices freely, without fear or dependency. I didn't have to act hastily. I didn't have to beg for respect. It was already within my grasp, and I only needed to act wisely to reclaim what was mine. That knowledge gave me a quiet satisfaction, a sense of control that Chelsea could never have imagined. Her scorn, her ridicule, and her false sense of superiority were meaningless against the facts she had ignored. The more she flaunted her arrogance, the more blind she became to the reality that I held all the cards, even while she thought she was winning. And in that moment, I realized something important. True strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits, quietly, patiently, and unseen, until the exact right time to assert itself. Chelsea believed she had conquered me, but she had only dug her own trap deeper. I had the tools, the knowledge, and the patience to turn the situation around entirely, and I would. The day I decided to stop doing their chores felt like the first breath of freedom I had taken in years. I didn't announce it. I simply stopped. No cooking, no cleaning, no errands. The dishes sat in the sink, the laundry waited in the basket, and I went about my own business, tending to small things for myself, reading a book, taking long walks, organizing my own space. For the first time in years, I didn't feel obligated to be at their beck and call. Chelsea noticed immediately. Her face twisted in disbelief, her voice sharp as she demanded, "Margaret, why aren't you helping? The house is a mess." I simply smiled faintly, keeping my voice calm. "I've done what I can today. Maybe someone else can take over." That calm, that refusal to react with fear or guilt, seemed to enrage her even more. Her outbursts became a daily routine. She yelled at me in the kitchen, stormed past me in the hallway, and snapped at Daniel for what she called my refusal to help. And Daniel still didn't stand up for me. Instead, he sighed, shaking his head. "Mom, just keep the peace," he would say, as though my dignity were a minor inconvenience that could be smoothed over with silence. At first, I tried to maintain patience. I reminded myself that this was part of the plan, letting their arrogance grow, letting them underestimate me, letting them reveal the worst of themselves. But patience has limits, and Chelsea tested mine every single day. The breaking point came one evening when she went too far. I had been quietly folding laundry in the living room, enjoying the rare feeling of calm. Chelsea came in, her voice mocking and cruel. She started making jokes about my late husband, poking fun at his habits, his work, even the way he had loved and protected me. The words were not just disrespectful. They were venomous, aimed directly at everything I had held sacred. Something inside me snapped. I set the folded clothes down, stood tall, and faced her. My voice was steady but firm, carrying the weight of years of endurance. "Chelsea," I said, "be careful whose patience you mistake for weakness." Her smirk faltered. She didn't expect me to speak like that, to assert myself with calm authority instead of trembling or apologizing. The room felt charged, the tension thick as her eyes widened, searching for a crack in my composure. But there wasn't one. I had found my voice, and with it, a new sense of power. Daniel sat silently, unsure of how to intervene. He had spent so long urging me to keep the peace that he didn't recognize the woman standing before him now. The same woman he had always known, but transformed by years of patience and careful planning. From that moment, the dynamics in the house began to shift. Chelsea's daily outbursts lost some of their bite because I no longer reacted with fear. I had drawn a line, quietly but unmistakably. The woman she had mocked, belittled, and tried to control was no longer willing to stay silent. I had discovered that patience was a tool, endurance a weapon, and silence a shield, but only until the moment arrived to use them. And that moment finally had come. After weeks of enduring Chelsea's constant belittling and Daniel's silence, I realized that subtle warnings and quiet resistance weren't enough. I needed to take a step that would finally protect my dignity and assert control over the situation. I quietly contacted a lawyer, explaining the history of the house, my contribution to the down payment, and the fact that my name was still on the deed. The lawyer confirmed what I already knew. I had every legal right to the property, and they had no claim to force me out. I didn't tell Daniel or Chelsea immediately. There was no point in giving them time to manipulate or pressure me. Instead, I prepared myself mentally for what was coming, knowing that the news would hit them hard. I went over every detail with my lawyer, ensuring everything was clear, accurate, and enforceable. I wasn't seeking revenge in a rash, emotional sense. I was claiming what was rightfully mine, and doing so with careful deliberation. Weeks later, the moment came. A letter was delivered to their door, official and firm. They had to vacate the house. I could almost hear the disbelief in their voices when Chelsea opened it first. She stormed into the living room where I was quietly reading, her face red with fury. "Margaret, this is insane. You're being completely vindictive. How could you do this to us?" she shouted, her words dripping with outrage and shock. I looked at her calmly, letting her rage hang in the air. Her fury didn't intimidate me the way it might have in the past. I had endured years of disrespect, humiliation, and insults, and I had finally found the courage and leverage to stand my ground. Chelsea's anger was loud, but I no longer feared it. Daniel appeared behind her, his face pale and desperate. "Mom, please, can we talk about this? Maybe we can work something out." I don't want you to be upset," he stammered. His voice trembled, the boy I had raised now begging me to reconsider. For a moment, I felt a twinge of sadness, not for the letter or the eviction, but for the years of silence and broken trust that had brought us here. I took a deep breath, steady and resolute, and met his gaze. "Daniel," I said firmly, "this house is mine. I've spent years raising you, building a life for us, and I will not live where I am disrespected. I won't tolerate being treated like a burden or a nuisance in my own home." Daniel's shoulders slumped. He had no words to counter the truth, no argument to override the years of patience, sacrifice, and now careful planning that had led me to this moment. Chelsea, still fuming, looked like she wanted to scream again, but even her words had lost their power. I stayed calm, letting the silence reinforce the finality of my decision. This wasn't about cruelty or revenge. It was about reclaiming respect, dignity, and the space I had earned. They had underestimated me for too long, and now they would learn the hard way that I was not the helpless woman they thought I was. This house, my home, my life, it was mine, and I would no longer allow anyone to strip that away. The days after the eviction were chaotic. Chelsea was the first to react, her fury spilling over into screams, accusations, and threats. She packed her things quickly, shouting at Daniel that she couldn't stay in a house controlled by someone she considered beneath her. Within a week, she had stormed out of the marriage, leaving Daniel to face the consequences of losing the house and adjusting to a much smaller, less comfortable apartment. It was sudden, messy, and completely predictable given her temper, but it left Daniel floundering in a way I had never seen him before. Daniel reached out to me in the weeks that followed, sending hesitant texts, calling occasionally, trying to re-establish a connection. At first, I didn't answer. I wanted to see if he would respect the boundaries I had set without me having to remind him. He had been silent when I was humiliated, indifferent when I was mocked, and passive when Chelsea treated me like a burden. Trust wasn't something you could rebuild overnight, not after years of allowing his wife to undermine and belittle me. Eventually, I agreed to meet him, not at my house but in a small cafe nearby. He came in, looking anxious, uncertain, and a little ashamed. "Mom," he began, voice low, I know I didn't stand up for you. I should have. I was scared, and I let things get out of control. Can we start over?" I studied him quietly, noting his sincerity, but also recognizing that apologies alone weren't enough. "Daniel," I said carefully, "I've spent years building a life, raising you, and protecting this family. Respect isn't something you can ask for after ignoring it. If we are going to have a relationship, it will be on my terms. Respect first, always." He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. He understood that things had changed, that the boy who had once blindly depended on me now had to acknowledge me as a person with authority, experience, and boundaries. It was awkward at first, a tentative step forward, but I could see the beginning of something new forming. A relationship based not on obligation or fear, but on genuine acknowledgement and care. Meanwhile, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Neighbors who had once pitted me or silently judged me for enduring Chelsea's insults were now seeing a different side of me. "Did you hear how Margaret stood up to them?" one would murmur. "The woman everyone called useless? She's stronger than anyone imagined." Children who had played in the yard during those barbecues now looked at me with a sort of quiet admiration. Neighbors stopped by occasionally to offer congratulations or just chat, respecting the authority I had reclaimed. It was strange but satisfying to watch the transformation in perception. The useless old woman label had stuck for years, but now it carried a different weight. I was no longer someone to be underestimated or dismissed. I had weathered humiliation, endured disrespect, and emerged with my dignity intact. Life settled into a quieter rhythm after that. I maintained my home, my routines, and my independence. Daniel was in my life, but cautiously, learning to respect me and understand the consequences of past inaction. And as for Chelsea, she was gone, a storm of chaos that had passed, leaving behind clarity, strength, and the knowledge that no one, not even family, could take away the respect I had finally secured for myself. Now, when I look around my home, it feels like a sanctuary. The house is mine, fully and entirely, and I fill it with the life I choose. I garden in the mornings, tending to flowers and vegetables with a calm focus that brings me joy. I cook when I feel like it, experimenting with recipes or preparing simple meals just for myself, savoring the freedom to decide what my day looks like without interference or judgment. Each small action is a reminder that I no longer live under someone else's control or expectations. I often think back to that summer barbecue, the day Chelsea humiliated me in front of neighbors, calling me a useless old woman. For years, that insult haunted me, replayed in my mind with an ache I couldn't shake. But now, I remember it differently. Not as a mark of shame, but as the moment everything shifted. That was the day I realized how much strength I had, how much patience and endurance had been simmering inside me all along. It was the spark that ignited the careful, deliberate actions I would take to reclaim my dignity. I didn't want revenge. That's an important thing to understand. I never acted out of cruelty or spite. My motivation was never to make Chelsea suffer or to punish Daniel. I wanted something far simpler and far more powerful: respect. I wanted to be recognized for the life I had built, for the sacrifices I had made, and for the person I am. That desire, quiet but unwavering, guided every step I took, and ultimately it was enough to change the course of my life. Living peacefully in my own home has given me a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. I no longer flinch at sharp words, no longer feel small or overlooked. Neighbors greet me warmly, sometimes commenting on how the useless old woman turned out to be far stronger than anyone imagined. I smile politely and carry on, knowing that the real victory isn't in their words or approval. It's in my own knowledge of what I've endured and how I've emerged. I keep the memory of that barbecue not as a wound, but as a lesson. Life will throw insults, betrayals, and humiliation our way, often from people we love or trust. But strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it waits, hidden, building beneath the surface until the right moment arrives. And when it does, it is unstoppable. As I sit in my garden, the sun warming my face, I reflect on how far I've come. The fear, the humiliation, the tears, they were all part of a journey that led me to a life of autonomy and peace. I have earned the right to be treated with respect, and I will not allow anyone to take it from me again. Never underestimate someone just because they're quiet. Sometimes silence is only the sound of a storm gathering. Do you think Margaret handled the situation the right way by standing up for herself? Or should she have tried to tolerate Chelsea and Daniel longer? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to hear what you think. And if you enjoy reading real-life family stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story.